So, good afternoon. My name is Andrea Petö. I'm teaching for the Central European University. I'm a professor of gender studies. And this is my honor and privilege to moderate these 60 minutes we have. You see we have got 6 speakers, so I will be extremely strict, and I send a note to everybody to follow the instructions. On the wonderful web page of this conference, you find the position paper for each and every panel. So the panelists are actually preparing their comments in response to those comments which are on the website. So here this panel is interested in how to teach in an innovative way. So we all know that the previous way of teaching, that here is a teacher, I'm telling you that it was Gavrilo Princip, that won't work anymore. It won't work because of several reasons. It won't work because this is a new generation, because of the digital world, because critical thinking is a major skill which is needed in our modern world. So I asked the panelists to be very brief to describe what they are doing, and then I asked them to explain what do they achieve. So what makes their particular project innovative? What makes it very interesting? So without further ado, I would like to start maybe, hope this is not an all-male panel exceptionally. So let's start with following this order which is here. So Martin, would you like to start, or yeah? So Martin Šmok is an old friend of mine. We have been working on the using the USC Shoah Foundation material for a long time, and this is a small moment of promotion. At the registration desk you find the book I co-edited with Helga Thorson on Holocaust memorialization, and we exactly asked the same question, that what can you do? What are the innovative ways of teaching Holocaust? The book is also online, but also you can have a copy if you write to that address. So I'm really looking forward to the presentation, and I keep the time.
Thank you very much. I understood that there will be a chance to give you a little bit more details about the archive of USC Shoah Foundation and the work being done with it globally at a breakfast meeting. So what I will show you now, for the sake of showing you at least some imagery of the digital and multimedia world that I'm working in, will be really just a very brief taste. And I will go back and I will try to show you a presentation featuring 2 of the most important projects that are based on the oral histories from the largest digital archive of witness testimony. For those of you who are not familiar with what this USC Shoah Foundation is, it's the organization that's usually called the Spielberg Foundation in our corners, that is in the Visegrad countries. It contains roughly 53,000 filmed witness testimonies, mostly with survivors of the Holocaust, but by now you have testimonies of survivors of other genocides included as well. And because all of those were filmed as live histories, basically it's a history of 20th century in multimedia, including photographical and documentation. The 2 projects I would like to present today are iWalks. iWalks is a project that's combining clips of those filmed testimonies with an authentic location on which the historical event described happened. By doing this, besides all the other things like bringing in emotion and a human face to a historical event, you are providing the historical event with the present time, because you are in the authentic location in the present moment, and you are providing a spatial context to the events, maybe even by providing a view of the void that's left on the site where something used to be. Because of the global scope of the archive, those iWalks could be both physical or virtual, using Google Maps and all kinds of visualizations, and my colleagues will be showing you something very similar with the gulag.cz project. We believe that performing this educational activity, and educational content is at the core of this, it's not a tourist walk, it really is an educational activity with clear objectives and goals. The moment you make the connection between the past and the present through the spatial context, you actually deliver much more of the outcomes than you may have thought. You localize history, you introduce a human being or a person into the historical subject matter, and you affect cognitive, affective, and moral levels of the students that you are taking through this experience. iWalks are currently being done in the Czech Republic, in Poland, and in Hungary, which happen to be the countries of interest to us. Some of them have a peer-to-peer element, some of them are self-guided, the project is continually evolving. The other project, or rather a digital platform I would like to introduce, is a digital platform called Eyewitness, which again is providing access to some of the testimonies from the USC Shoah Foundation archive, roughly 3,500 in all kinds of languages. It's an e-learning tool as well. It gives the teachers all kinds of controls over the groups and activities that they're running. So it's something that can be used by educators and by students. It's revolutionary in combining different kinds of digital databases and resources. And it's really revolutionary in allowing global users in a global setting, in multiple languages, to create their own multimedia assets based on the testimonies from the USC Shoah Foundation archive. This is the editor that sits in Eyewitness. I'm going through really fast because the time is really limited, but again, we may have more time to discuss Eyewitness at the breakfast meeting. The last thing I wanted to point you towards, because of the Visegrad content of this conference, is a resource that was made available on Moderní dějiny, or Modern History portal run by the PANT NGO in Ostrava, which presents testimonies of witnesses as a part of shared space in Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, and Polish. And quite a few of those tiny movies based on survivor testimonies challenge the usual narratives that are so deeply embedded not only in the educational activities but also in the stereotypical understanding of our Central European existence. So for example, in all of those languages there is a lesson about the occupation of the Češin region, which very often gets skipped when we talk about the Munich Agreement and the occupation of the Czechoslovak borderlands. There are memories about the underground network that was connecting Poland with Hungary during the Second World War, and stories that came out of that. And there is of course much more, but we do not have that much time to go into details. I will be here, I will be at tomorrow's breakfast. I am ready to answer any questions you may have about those projects or the archive or anything else related to USC Shoah Foundation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. So we learned from this brief presentation that there are new actors who are actually showing up in the memory business, and they are using new digital technologies, and also that the public history is becoming a space for different actors, and this is all due to the digital turn. So the next speaker will be Štěpán Černoušek, who is from the Gulag project, and he will show us a small film and some very brief stories. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So let's go from Holocaust to Gulag. And I would like to show you our project, which is about mapping and documenting abandoned Gulag camps in Russia, in Siberia. I will show you a very short movie which explains what our project is about. It's with English subtitles. tří expedic jsme podrobně prozkoumali, zmapovali a nakoupili několik vláků právě kolem organizace realizace. Dopuštění katalogů parátů jsme sice přivezli spoustu materiálu a dokumentace samotné paráty. Zatímco z nacistických koncentračních táborů jsou dnes hodně navštěvovaná pamětní místa, v Rusku neexistuje jediné muzeum vytvořené přímo v palého stalinického lágru. Proto bychom rádi vytvořili online muzeum gulagu, kompletní 3D rekonstrukci lágru, spojenou s expozicí nalezených předmětů a úkolových vyprodejů, aby lidé měli možnost navštívit tato místa a spojit gulagu. So it's what we are doing, our plans to create really big online museum of the Gulag, and now I very briefly show you what is today's situation of our project. We have on our website gulag.cz 3D model of one Gulag camp. You can go inside of all buildings and have a look how does it look like inside barracks, all kinds of barracks. There is also a brief history of the Gulag, and not only of the Gulag but also of Czechoslovak, Poles and Hungarian citizens which were repressed in Soviet Union. And now we are in process of creating more virtual, more 3D museum, and as well we would like to also speak about how to use it for educational, like an educational aid. We are not teachers, we are just researchers, historians, and I will be happy to hear from you your ideas how to use it in schools. Thank you.
Thank you. So we learned from this that there are certain spaces which are not accessible, and then through digital ways this can be shown. And the question is, what is the difference? Then you see this man hiking and visiting the places, and what's the difference between those experiences when you see those buildings and barracks on your screen in your comfy chair? So that's also an issue what teachers should discuss. Okay, so the next speaker is Martón Liska, and he is one of those secondary school teachers who will tell us about an excellent field trip.
Hello everyone. There are two questions which were at the focus of this field trip with secondary school students, but obviously this material or this activity can be done with adults as well. The first question was how historical narratives are constructed, and the second is how propaganda uses or misuses these historical narratives. And I would like to start with a photo and ask all in the room except for the Hungarians, where are we at the moment? What's on the picture? Budapest, Kossuth Square, that was the first guess. Budapest is right, Kossuth Square. Hősök tere, in other words, Hero Square, that's right. Oops, how can I stop this? Because before, okay, with space perhaps. Okay, so well, the idea was to leave the classroom finally with the students and go to an interesting place where you can learn history by sort of having a look at actually what is out there. There are two important aspects of this activity. The first is related to heroes and the other is related to Square. Now, in relation to heroes, those of you who've been to this square in Budapest, which is really the sort of, it's called the Millennium Monument, and it commemorates the 1000th anniversary of the Hungarian conquest of the Carpathian Basin, and it was erected in 1896, just at the turn of the 19th century. You might not know that those 14 figures, those 14 statues, those 14 heroes are not identical to those 14 heroes who were erected originally. Because after 1945, 5 out of these 14 people, 14 statues were removed. The 5 statues who were removed, they were pro-Habsburg, actually they were Habsburg kings and one queen. And these 5 people were replaced by anti-Habsburg Hungarian freedom fighters. The last being at the moment Lajos Kossuth. Now, as far as I experienced, and that was one goal of this activity, this is a really sort of very good material to teach students that history is really closely linked to the perspective of the present. Also to discuss issues like, is it a reconstruction, what historians do, or is it a construction? And also the role of history in the nation-building processes and in nationalism. I think that this material discussing the history of this monument, not the history of the actual heroes, but the history of the monument, is also a brilliant tool to discuss ideology and politics behind these historical narratives. Now, the other area where this activity focuses is the use of open spaces. Those of you who've been to Budapest may know that this is one square, apart from Kossuth Square, which all tourists visit. And this is also, this square played a key role in the 20th century where loads of demonstrations happened. And I brought a few photos, which also I've presented the students, just to show that how this symbolic place, Hero Square, was used by the propaganda. Now, this picture represents the original Hero Square. That memorial in the middle is linked to the ancient Hungarian history. This is another picture from the 1896, so as it is originally was built, and this picture is from 1919, from the time of the Hungarian communist dictatorship, which was really a brief period from March till August. And what happened on this square, as you can see, that the communists sort of didn't find any place in their historical narrative to these figures, and they put red carpet all over the red blankets all over the monument, and they replaced this this Christian monument in the middle with Marx, with the statue of Marx. So they didn't use it for, they did use on the one hand for political propaganda, and on the other hand they sort of, they use it also to deny another historical narrative. The next picture is the same square, Hero Square, 1938, interwar period. The Eucharistical Congress and a Holy Mass celebrated with the presence of the Pope, which was sort of a symbol of the then conservative Christian haughty period. There's no photo of how they demolished the old Habsburg statues in 1945, but the next picture, this one, is from 1956. actually from 1957, when János Kádár came to power and organized a huge demonstration on May the 1st to demonstrate that his power received legitimacy in Hungary after putting down the revolution in 1956. So in the end, the communist rule also found a place in its historiography, Hero Square, and used this venue for his tool. And there are there you can see János Kádár in the middle giving a speech. Actually, okay. 30 seconds, actually facing the crowd, and the monument, the Millennium Monument, the heroes are behind his back. And the last picture is from 1989, the reburial ceremony of Imre Nagy, the executed Hungarian Prime Minister from 1956. Actually, the reburial ceremony also took place on Hero Square, but this was not just about 1956, but also a milestone in this conversion from dictatorship to democracy. So, just as a conclusion, how politics use open spaces, in this case, in the case of Hero Square, very well demonstrates that it uses it as a decoration, also as a symbolic denial of other ideologies, and also sometimes as a tool for receiving or gaining legitimacy.
So, thank you very much. We learned from this presentation that secondary level school children should be taught how the topography of different regimes are actually can be traced in the spaces, and also how this visual representation is also a product of certain regimes. So this is not how it was, but it's also the visual narrative is also important, telling different stories. So our next speaker is Karina Hoření from the Institute for Study of Totalitarian Regimes.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to be present at this conference, and because the program was so interesting, also my colleagues come, and it's Zdenek K and Lani Selinger, so I'm also talking in their name. We all are lecturers at the institute, so our work is mainly to produce digital learning materials for teachers about modern Czech or Czechoslovak history. But today we are presenting a little bit different project. We are now designing digital platform which is named Socialism Realized, and it's offering teaching materials about socialism and a socialist period, but in English, so it's aimed for a different public than usually. We are thinking about, let's say, students, high school students in France who wants to know something about the year 1968 in whole Europe, or undergraduate students at the American college who are studying some subject connected with Central Europe. But then we are all the time struggling with the question, like, is this important? Is the Central European history important also outside the region? Because if you take a look at the program of the conference, these are mostly people from Central Europe talking about Central Europe. So is it relevant also outside this region? Well, we think that it is, because this history of so-called Eastern Bloc was often overlooked, but it's an organic part of European history, and this experience of socialism is also an organic part of some emerging European identity. But then the next question is how to deliver this message about what we should say about this history to people outside, because this also lacks some cultural knowledge. Because even if we are often critical about that Czech students don't know anything about the Czech history, they still have a lot of cultural knowledge from the popular culture, from the popular memory. So the message you are giving to people outside this cultural milieu needs to be quite simple. But on the other hand, you need to avoid stereotypes. We don't want to to reproduce the stereotypes about the Eastern Bloc with red stars and First May parade. But on the other hand, we also don't want to reproduce the dichotomic stories about repression on one hand side and heroism on the other side. We try to promote the multi-perspectivity, this principle to education in general, that the history education should demonstrate should demonstrate why certain historical events are perceived differently and why they are remembered differently by different social groups. But to get this multi-perspectivity into the classroom, we are using mostly short movies, movie clips or short documentaries together with other historical sources, because the short movie is also it's very visually attractive. It provides you with a structured and simple situation, and you can also demonstrate how different points of view on the event from different actors. But how to work with this with the movie? We follow the approach of constructivist pedagogy, which is also the term I think we should name here. And I think this is what you have already mentioned, that the historical sources shouldn't be used only to illustrate what was said by teacher or what was written in the textbook, but the students themselves should be encouraged to analyze the historical sources, maybe even to confront the different messages delivered by different historical sources. But then the outcome of this kind of education is not only a person who is able to reproduce the national story or to reproduce facts about the past. I personally don't think that everyone needs to know what was the Prague Spring, but then the outcome of this of the learning process is someone who gains some historical critical thinking, because we mostly are talking here about different methods that our organization are using, but also we should talk about what is, if we share some how what should be the outcome of education at the end. And for me personally, it's someone who doesn't just reproduce the national narrative, if there's something like a national history, but it's someone who can analyze how the term nation was created and how it was used and misused in certain periods in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You brought in two very interesting aspects. Please don't hesitate to applaud her. Yeah. You brought in the issue of language, that who is the audience whom this kind of teaching material is actually produced, and you brought in the issue of how interestingly, even after the European Union accession, the history of Eastern Europe remained the history of Eastern Europe and somehow did not integrate it into the history of Europe. So what is the price of this regionalism, and what are the consequences, and how to connect this with certain interesting new aspects of teaching. We will get back to this, because I think you put your finger on the most important issue, which is the learning outcome, to use this horrible pedagogical language. The learning outcome, which is critical minds who are able to deconstruct these national myths and national narratives. So I would like to give the mic to somebody who is also giving tours, guided tours to foreign audience in Warsaw. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Jan Darasz, and I'm a very old school city guide around Warsaw, and also not just around the city itself, but around the Royal Castle. One of my jobs in Warsaw is to take parties, generally speaking, from what we can loosely call the Western world, and explain what Warsaw is all about. It's a funny place. It's like going around an old battlefield that has changed over time. You can sometimes still see the positions and the trench lines or whatever. Other features have totally disappeared and melted into the landscape or become overgrown by nature. And I think Warsaw is a bit like this. Most of the people who come have a minimal knowledge of the region, not just the V4, but certainly Warsaw. They may have heard some myths and legends and old wives' tales about Poland and Warsaw. Some groups, some individuals bring preconceived prejudices with them. That's not to say that minimal knowledge, it's not to say that they don't ask the right questions, because generally people are curious, and you just need to when we're standing in front of a pile of concrete, a big concrete block, we start the journey back in time, and we're able to kind of dig an intellectual trench, for example, back through time, and to note all the changes. In a place as noisy as Warsaw, the digital technology does have its limitations, although we're able to show, as my colleague did, and as we'll be able to show tomorrow in the breakfast meeting, that the photographers, so certainly from the 19th century onwards, you're able to stand in the same place as a photographer or a painter, and you can begin your journey along the timeline, either towards the present or from the present back into the past. So you're able to show the same feature. In Warsaw, sometimes it's missing, and then it's rebuilt, and then missing again, changed. But you're able to show from this one perspective. What my learning outcome is depends very much on the group. To a group that, say, is from India, is a very cursory knowledge of Poland, you're just really introducing the city in its basic form. To a group travelling from Israel, for example, who may have very strong Warsaw connections, you can then give a more nuanced view. To someone who, for example, a guy from the Netherlands, who arrived with his tablet and was able, we did the Judaic tour, the ghetto history, the ghetto uprising. He had every street scene that he could lay his hands on, archival evidence, and he wanted to be in the same position on the street as the tablet showed. So he wanted to follow in the footsteps of the German operation to liquidate the ghetto. So very much a tailored process. I try not to concentrate on, although it's very difficult, try not to concentrate just on death and destruction and rebuilding. Try and give a longer perspective. Warsaw is a fascinating history, a fascinating urban development history, even if you exclude all the reshaping from politics and ideology. So my aims are very limited. Is to introduce to somebody who has probably zero knowledge of the city a brief taster of what Warsaw is like, and then if they're interested, they can use the mountains of digital evidence available to develop their studies further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you are being very modest and you are underestimating the power what the narrative of the tourist guide has got in the as an impact on the lives of the tourists who are there. I personally, I'm also doing guided tours, the feminist Budapest, and for the Mother's Days and the Mother's Day, a whole bus is filled with interested people who want to see what you cannot see, because Budapest is an extremely masculine city. If you look at the statues, the names of the streets, or the topography is very much a masculine city, but I can tell stories about buildings which are not marred by plagues. And this is the power what the guide has, the story, the narrative. I also have a narrative now. We have a mystery participant whom I don't know, but I'm sure you will contribute to this discussion.
Okay, my name is Fedor Blaščák. I came from Bratislava. I was basically invited for probably as a substitute for someone, and I will be very short in showing you just one graph and one website. 2 years ago we made a public survey on the Slovak war state and the Holocaust in the historical memory of Slovak society, and one of the questions we asked was the question on the sources of the knowledge and information on that era, and this is kind of a framework or a context in which maybe the whole discussion on teaching history. So have a look on that on one of the graphs. It's here. What was your source of information and knowledge about the persecution and mass killings of the Jews during the period of the Slovak state and about the Holocaust? As you can see, the school is a prominent source. The results are for the general public. 44% of the people in Slovakia draws the knowledge on the modern history from the schools. We can of course discuss for next 2 days about what is in reality being taught at the schools, how the public discourse is organized by the political leaders relating to that era, which is a horrible story. Anyway, we can see that the schools still keeps the prominent position, but there are public media, very strong, family, friends and acquaintances, so family and friends together, you know the rumors, very strong, exceeding 40%, almost 40, exceeding even more than 40%, whatever. The people could list 2 options. That's why the score goes beyond 100%. So, a very poor performance of NGOs, only 1%, really bad. But we can go around and assume that those projects are being realized through the schools, which could have in turn been viewed as the primary source. Anyway, the NGOs are very not visible in teaching history in Slovakia regarding that topic. I think from this list, this is a very important helicopter view on how public discourse can be influenced in general on modern history, that schools, still being the dominant source, are providing different type of knowledge than, for example, films and the family stories and the so-called rumors, the oral historical sources in general. We can see that there are basically 2 main sources, which is one of them is organized more or is tackling more an emotional memory. The another one is tackling more the cognitive side of the memory. The relationships between the 2 is of course was not the subject matter of the project, but we can assume anyway that this emotional sources are are stronger and, after all, dominant in shaping historical memory on Slovak war state and the persecutions of the Jews in Slovakia nowadays. Regarding the very poor performance of the NGOs, I came here to present you one project so this is a project which I am part of personally and also institutionally through Slovak NGO Stanica Žilina Záriečie. It's called Vrba Wetzlar Memorial. All of you perhaps are familiar with the famous names of Rudolf Vrba and Alfred Wetzlar, two Slovak Jews that escaped Auschwitz in April '44. Last year there was a zero edition of the Vrba Wetzlar Memorial, which is a march. I can maybe have which is a march from Auschwitz to Žilina in the footsteps of how we call them heroes. Last year there was a zero issue, so we basically tested the whole program and how is it feasible for a basic or general audience or general public. This year in August, starting on I guess 19th August, there will be a 9-day long march from Auschwitz to Žilina, and this is our so-called response to this problem of how to teach history in an innovative way. Of course, the whole thing is open, the whole project is open to anybody from Czech Republic, Slovak Republic. We have some people coming from United States. We have Greta Verbova coming, who is former or a wife of Rudolf Vrba, now in her 92. She is 92 years old. She will come to Žilina to greet the people who will participate. The concept of the march is very easy. The original idea was the idea of a daughter of Rudolf Vrba, who wished, and she said it to Fedor Gal, the daughter, she wished to keep the memory on her father, heroic struggle in some way that is not, that is very alive. So we decided to run this memorial, and we somehow think of it as a participative monument. So it's not only a march, it's in some sense a monument, which is a processual monument, basically a monument that is enacted every year in a new way by a new people. So please have a look, and maybe you can join the memorial one day. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we learned that through the stories, recovering stories, and somehow attaching a pedagogical program to that stories, actually students can be involved, and they are learning a lot differently through their participation. So this was a very colorful introduction to you about the different pedagogical projects. I wonder if the panelists, they have got questions to each other? Yeah.
Well, I have one to our ghost guest who came as the last one. I was wondering, he criticized this term, learning outcomes, but I was wondering if you can tell us more, like, what do you think would be the outcome of this march you were presenting here? I was just wondering that I understand that this is a way how to get this story into the media, into the public space. And what about the personal experience of the participants? Do you think that this is some way how then they will be closer to the experience of the people who really fled the Auschwitz? Because on the other hand, it's the structure. If you put of the meaning and why is it happening, it looks like very traditional holiday that a group of people is sleeping in a cabin, and what will be then the message? Can they really experience it? I was wondering also, to put it together, there's right now the Czech television was broadcasting a series which was called Holiday in Protectorate. Protectorate was the name for the occupied Bohemia during the Second World War, and it was really criticized with how you can really play in the TV the real emotions of the Second World War. So if you can, and this was very criticized, so where is then the border? How to commemorate?
I suggest to collect questions, Martin.
Well, actually, I had a similar kind of a question, but I will abbreviate it extremely. Why only those two? Why only those two from the entire group that was supposed to take out the information and deliver it into the free world? That's my question.
A comment from, I suppose, the British side, and how they have commemorated, for example, the First World War, and once the physical survivors have died, then as my colleague said, some serious celebrations, serious commemorations may then have the character of celebration, or, like you said, even more extremely, a holiday. And this is certainly true of a lot of the British press attitudes to 1914, and even now how to kind of mark the end of the Second World War as physical survivors die off.
Okay, so you received lots of questions. That was a very successful jump into this panel, because you seem to be in the center, so you have got...
Maybe this is only just how the memory works, because I was the last one, so... Okay, I just, so very briefly, the whole program of the march is being organized. It starts in Auschwitz with a guided tour, or how they call it. It has a very symbolic start. Then the whole road, the whole trip is, as I said, is more meant to be a participatory monument than a guided tour, because basically each day you have to somehow go through more than 20 kilometers, which is a physically very demanding. This is a kind of a we can call it a meditation through the walk, reflection on what on the story which you get introduced in Auschwitz by a professional. And coming to Žilina, you can have a look behind. There is a really high-profile conference, which is now my answer to the second question too. Also, the second question was why only those two, Vrba and Wetzlar. Have a look, uncovering the Shoah, resistance of the Jews, and efforts to inform the world on genocide. We have a whole day academic conference, discourse production with presentations with the unique findings of Czech, Slovak, and international historians, each dedicated to some different story of a different escape. Be it, for example, Ladislav Junger, as I can see, or Dionys Lenart from Majdanek, and all the others that we by now, all the historians we work with by now are able to present in some compact way. There is a 2-day long program, except the academic conference, also with the discussion, the reflection of the people, of the participants, together with Ms. Verba, which comes to greet them. So the whole thing is organized in a very broad cultural academic way. What is the outcome? The outcome is experience, knowledge and experience, yeah.
Thank you. I'm sure we agree that experience and knowledge are not in themselves, but they are products of certain frameworks of understanding and also certain activities. So knowledge is something which has a certain politics, and that's a kind of wider question for the whole Holocaust memorialization. Is there a secular framework for that? Because this pilgrimage culture, which is very much there, it's also connected to spirituality. Is this a new way how Holocaust memorialization should go? Is this connection with spiritual forces? Anyway, I think this is the time to open up for questions. If there are questions, or everybody is totally exhausted and waiting for Michal to announce where we can have dinner. Okay, so we are in time. I'm not pushing this further. I just would like to say that this gave a very interesting overview of the different Central European projects. Digital archives, digital museums, guided tours, using clips, photos for memorialization, how in the classrooms certain field trips can be used, how the Holocaust memorialization is actually played through spiritual and pilgrimage tours, which are very much there. None of them has got the philosopher's stone, right? But they are all trying to answer to the question, how can we get beyond the very traditional political history and the different competing national narratives? And I think that is a task for the future, to think about how digital can actually change the way how we are approaching sources, knowledge and experiences. This panel did not give the answer, but I think that was a good start. Thank you very much for the participants.